Further Ramblings of Railwaymen. Phil Bassett, Nine Elms Motive Power Depot. His journey from the ash pits to the boardroom. Phil first started work at Nine Elms Motive Power Depot in October 1961 as an engine cleaner, the bottom of the ladder, so to speak, in the line of promotion to becoming a driver. Phil passed out as a fireman by Inspector John Barrett at the same firing school as myself at Guildford in May 1962, so I'm sure that during those first few months working as a fireman at Nine Elms, he too was experiencing the same feelings as myself. However, an illustrious railway career followed, with Phil firing to a diverse range of drivers at Nine Elms, the last 3 years in the top link with driver George Lloyd. He was also, like myself, working on steam locomotives ranging from M7 class motor tanks to Bulleid Pacifics, before our depots finally closed in July 1967. Along with a lot of other fellow firemen and drivers, Phil transferred to Waterloo, and in 1969, when reaching the age of 23, he passed his driving exam and was appointed driver in 1972. He then joined Waterloo Southside Training School as an acting instructor and then was appointed instructor in 1974. In 1979, he moved to Carlo Street, LMR, as a senior instructor, and in 1984 he was appointed to Divisional Chief Traction Inspector. In 1987 he progressed to the BRB Channel Tunnel Project Team, and in conjunction with his SNCF and SNCB colleagues was proud to be responsible for the cab designs of the Class 373 Eurostar. Along the way, he was instructing on the Advanced Passenger Train, APT, where he got his first taste for high-speed operations and became part of a team that helped the Taiwanese train their high-speed drivers. But now let's return to the beginning of Phil's fascinating career within the railway industry, his first interest, and then becoming an engine cleaner at Nine Elms Motive Power Depot.
A school friend of mine, a chap called Raymond Wynne, he was a keen train spotter, and we always used to laugh at Raymond because in the playtime at school he would have all these railway books and he would be crossing out the names of engines that he'd seen. And he came in one day and we said to him, well, what are you doing? What are you working for, Raymond? Oh, so he could go on a train spotter's trip to somewhere and buy some new books because his parents said that if he wanted to enjoy railway, train spotting, etc., he had to fund it himself. And I managed to coax out of him one of his old train spotting books, which I still have to this day, with his name written inside of it, Raymond Wynne of Murat Street, Kennington. And I often looked through it and thought, well, is that what provoked my interest in the railways? Well, and he said, oh, I'm going off to Nine Elms Depot at Battersea. So I said, where the hell's that? Oh, he said, oh, it's just up the end of Lansdowne Road and just the other side of Wandsworth Road. So one afternoon I decided to tag along with Raymond, and it was a most foreboding experience, walking from Wandsworth Road down Brooklands Road to see the big steam locomotive depot. We stood at the gate there and we could see all these massive steam locomotives moving around the place, and Raymond would try and sneak in the front gate so he could get a closer look at an engine, and I couldn't understand what enjoyment he was getting out of all these visits. It must have stuck in my mind because beginning of spring 1961 I was totally bored with school. And so during the summer holidays again, myself and Raymond Wynne, we went to Nine Elms, both of us. And I remember saying to the guy in the gatehouse, well, are there any jobs here for firemen? Because I've been told that firemen earn £5, £7 a week. And he said, go in to see the chief clerk. And so Raymond Wynne and I, we went in to see the chief clerk and said that we want a job as a fireman. What do we do? And he said, well, you've got to go and have a medical first of all. And one of the first vivid memories that I have was in the administration office at Nine Elms, which was a long, flat bungalow with a very high desk where all these clerks in black uniform were standing up, writing on these large, tall desks that had a sloping surface, and they used to lift the lid up and put their, very similar to a school desk, but about twice as high. And they had these large, high backs, four-seater stools, very, very similar to bar stools, but of course not so grandiose. And they used to sit at these stools with their legs dangling down. But there was one guy that was writing out a docket for me to go and have a medical. And I was standing next to him, and I thought he had a very, very severe asthmatic or breathing problem, because all the time he's writing, I could hear this. And I said to Raymond Wynne, who was standing at the side of me, bloody hell, couldn't stand working in an office with him. And all of a sudden he made a cough and he pointed out to the window. And there was this steam locomotive moving past, steam jetting out the front of the cylinders. Now, at later stages, I found that the driver had the cylinder cocks open, but somebody who didn't know anything about the workings of a steam locomotive, it was gushing out of steam that sounded like this poor chap had a severe asthmatic problem. And so I didn't go down too well with him, because I found out afterwards he was the chief clerk and he was writing out this docket for me to go and have a medical at London Bridge. We then were given this ticket and told to go to Vauxhall Station and catch a train to London Bridge. This was all on the same day, I hasten to add. This must have been about 10:30, 11 o'clock. And so we went into the medical examination room, and I remember that the office at London Bridge was in Tooley Street, and it was the building's still there today, and I still look up at the windows and you can see the leftovers from a footbridge that gave direct access into this office at London Bridge off of platforms 1 and 2. And the building followed the contours of the railway line and the road, and it went to a very, very narrow triangular, very similar to what they call the Flatiron building in New York. So we went into this wedge of a building, and we were told to go along to the very end where there were cubicles, where we were told to sit in the cubicle, all typical cream and brown Southern Railway, Southern Region colour schemes. And we were told to strip off to our waist where we would be examined. And so there was Raymond and I sitting in this, each in our own cubicle, shouting over the top. And these cubicles were like the old cubicles you used to have in the public baths, where there was a gap at the bottom where you could see the legs dangling of the person in the next cubicle, but you couldn't see over the top. And so we were sitting on this bench and bending down and saying, how are you getting along, and things like that. Well, it transpired afterwards that Raymond had failed his medical, and so he was sent packing, and I was, so it must have been the chest element, because I remember having my chest listened to, and then told to take another bit of paper to go along to have my eyesight tested. And when Raymond was leaving, he said, oh, I'll see you later, type of thing. And so I carried on having the medical examination. And one of the things that I remember vividly of the medical examination, I was given a book to read and told to read the passage of the book. And I looked at it and I immediately spotted that the grammar was not correct. And the phrase that I was asked to read out, I've never forgotten. And the phrase was, and then when I was got home to my little house. And then whoever it was that was conducting the examination said, stop, that will do. I said, but it's written wrong. That's all right. That's what we wanted to identify. Then I went on to the eyesight examination where I was given cards with, which I found out later to be the Ishihara colour defective vision perception test. And I sailed through 28, 39, 33, all these numbers that were camouflaged amount in a circular display of other issues. So obviously my colour vision was correct. The next colour vision defective test, of course, was the Edridge Green Lantern. Now, I used to think it was Edridge and his Green Lantern, and when the lantern was shown to me as being a black assembly, I was quite surprised. And then I asked the question, why is it called the Edridge Green Lantern? And I think that was an indicator of my inquiring mind. I didn't always take things at face value. Well, of course, it was again named after the inventor of the test assembly, Professor Edridge Green. And this lantern was virtually a light source that projected light in the primary signalling colours of red, yellow and green and, of course, white. They could diffuse the colours, which they used to call the fogging test, to replicate observation of signals through fog or any other mist that could contaminate the driver's perception of the signal. And I remember quite clearly calling out red and calling out green, but when I was presented with the amber, I delayed because I wanted to give the true, was it a huey red amber or was it a yellow sunlight amber? And I remember the doctor saying, well, if you can't tell me what it is, you'll never be an engine driver. And I said, well, it's yellow, sir. He said, thank you. And that was the end of the test. I then proceeded back to Nine Elms depot. This must have been about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Gone into the depot. The chief clerk, Mr. Reg Lusher, his name again I recall because he was quite a nice chap. Once I got over the asthmatic accusations when he first saw me, he was quite a nice chap and he said, yes, there are vacancies for firemen at the depot, but first of all I would have to be an engine cleaner. And as I couldn't work on mechanics or work at night, that would have to wait until my 16th birthday, which of course would have been 1962. Well, I said, no, I want a job now. He said, right. He said, well, if you get your parents' permission, we will allow you to start in October as an engine cleaner. Monday, the 30th of October, 1961, I presented myself at the Shedmaster's office at Nine Elms Motive Power Depot, Battersea. There were 3 of us joining on the same day. The charge hand, foreman, cleaner duly came to collect us. A guy whose name was Ben Apted. And he was dressed like a driver. He had a black jacket on, a greased top hat, and blue overalls, and blue engineer's shirt, and black tie, and black boot. But he was spotlessly dressed. Whereas all the other train crews, the drivers and firemen that I saw whilst I was waiting to be escorted down the depot, all seemed to be covered in dirt, covered in grease. There was fitters, and you could tell a fitter because he didn't wear overalls, he wore a boiler suit. And there were shed labourers working away, Jamaicans, Africans, Hungarians, all doing various tasks around the depot to keep the depot going. Well, Ben Apted took the 3 of us down to the stores where we were kitted out with a grease top hat and 2 pair of overalls. And then he said, I'm going to take you to the cleaners' lobby. Well, word lobby, I'd never heard of that used before. Since found out that a lot of words used in the railway have military connotations, and so charge sheets and things like that, daily orders, standing orders, all these things stem from the historical military application that was applied to railway operating because of the discipline that it instilled. Well, anyway, we were marched across to what was called number 25 Road at Nine Elms Motive Power Depot. Well, anyway, we were walked across to the cleaners' lobby, and we went into what I can only describe as a bombed-out house. It's very similar to the bomb site that we used to play on as kids. There was no door, just the brickwork opening where the door used to be. There was no floor, just compounded mud and brick debris packed down. And it was a derelict house. That's the only way to describe it. A derelict house, and we went into a room that was bare brick walls. There was no ceiling as such. We just looked up to the gables of the pitched roof that had tiles missing. You could see daylight from it. And in the corner of this room was a big cast iron fat-bellied stove roaring away. And even this fat pot-bellied stove didn't have the fire brick liner. It was just like an oil drum with holes pickaxed into it and a chimney attached to it, and it was burning wood and coal and rags, any old rubbish. And there was this large refractory table that I suppose once upon a time had had a nice surface finish, but it was now just planks that shone all the grooves of the wood, and a couple of old chairs, and we were told that this was the cleaners' lobby. And this is where we had to leave our belongings, because we came to work in our overalls in the end, because simply there was nowhere to change. There was no such thing as showers or toilet. It was literally a bomb site. Well, the next day I turned up resplendent in my blue uniform, blue trousers. I went and bought a donkey jacket from the army surplus shop, just to put over my overalls, and I bought a engineer's blue shirt, a pair of tough boots because they seemed to be the things to wear, a flask of tea and some sandwiches. I'll never forget the old cream and orange thermos flask that lasted about a week before somebody knocked it off the table. And so as cleaner boys, we were taken by the senior cleaner and told, this is the engine you've got to clean. And I looked at this massive great steel monstrosity and thought, well, how the hell do we clean this? And apparently we were a gang of cleaners. There were two gangs of 6 individuals, myself and the other 2 who joined with me on that same day. We were the junior 3 of this gang of 6 that was led by a senior cleaner. And we were told to go and get a bucket of oil from the stores, some paraffin and some cotton waste. And we were told to dip the cotton waste in this mixture of paraffin and oil and just start wiping. Well, that's all we done. We used to get this cotton waste and we used to try and wipe all the grime off of the locomotive, and sometimes this grime was thick and caked on. We used to follow around one of the shed labourers called Dudley. He was a Jamaican guy, and Dudley was in charge of what was called the weaver plant. Well, the weaver plant, today we would know it as a high-pressure steam cleaning device, but as there was no electricity around the depot, this thing used to work. It had a paraffin burner that used to generate steam, and steam was used to operate pump that used to draw water from the hydrant supply, and then used to supply by large lances high pressure hot steam water jet to try and dislodge some of the dirt that had accumulated around the underframe of the steam locomotive. And Dudley used to specialise on cleaning the mechanical motion, the exterior valve gear and the frame and wheels of the locomotive, because this is the area that was lubricated quite heavily. And of course, if you had any heavy lubrication, any dirt that was flying about used to get attracted and stuck there. And so it was our job to go around after Dudley and clean the motions and bring them up and burnish them nearly as bright steel as possible. Well, after a couple of months of this, some of the other members of the gang were allowed to go away to what was called firing school to learn how to be firemen. And they used to take the mickey of us because they were firemen and we were cleaner boys. And I learned from a very, very early stage that seniority is going to be the only way of advancement within the motive power department. And these guys that had been to firing school, they were the cat's whiskers, they were the bee's knees. They were actually doing what we wanted to do. When we were finished our cleaning for the day, it was all common nature to actually get up into the footplate of a locomotive and speak to these firemen, these past cleaners, because we were told that our progression was to be self-educated. As an engine cleaner, we were expected to familiarise ourselves with the working parts of a steam locomotive, how steam was generated, how the fire was managed in the firebox, how the boiler managed the storage of steam, and to some extent, how the steam was used to drive the locomotive forward. And I have to say, having an inquiring mind, I found that period very, very interesting. As a cleaner boy, no formal instruction was given. We had to pick it up by self-endeavour to learn brilliant parts of a steam locomotive. And we were told that when we went to firing school, that as much information that we gleaned as cleaners would assist us in our passage through firing school. And I remember that it was great fun to find a driver or a fireman that would take the time to explain the inner workings of a steam locomotive to an inquiring 15-year-old as myself. And the real icing on the cake was if you could cadge a footplate ride from Nine Elms up to Waterloo, just to be able to stand on the footplate whilst the engine was moving. And of course we used to do that whenever an engine was moved in the depot for positioning purposes, because sometimes the engines we were cleaning were totally dead. They were cold, they'd been on boiler washout, and we were cleaning them ready for their next working. And to enable the engine to be positioned correctly for its departure off a shed, what was called the shed shunter, which was a small shunting locomotive, used to come up and move the engines. And as cleaner boys, we used to hate that because we had large wooden trestles and ladders that we had to position against the side of the locomotive to climb up and reach the top of the boiler, reach the top of the cab and clean it. And if the shed shunter was now going to move this locomotive, that meant that we had to stop our cleaning activities, wait to see where the locomotive was going to be put, and then move all our trestles around to the new location. So it was quite an upset to us getting through our day's work, because basically as soon as we got through our cleaning allocation, we could then walk round the depot and learn things. And so I always used to try and get my cleaning done quickly. The senior cleaner used to come round and make sure that we were doing a good job, and the charge hand cleaner used to come round to make sure that we were not slacking or sloping off and go and have a fag out the way somewhere, which we used to do. We used to go and slope off, say we're going to the toilet, and then climb up in the cab of a steam engine tucked away at the back of the shed and dream that we're charging down the main line at 100 mile an hour. We used to pull regulators open and get hold of a firing shovel and shovel coal into a dead firebox and pretending that we're on the main line, when in reality we were tucked away at the back of the shed. And you could always hear the footstep of Ben Apted walking on the old brick floor as he was looking for us, and we used to dog our fags and hide in the cab, go into the tender and hide into the tender. And I remember one boy, he actually climbed into the water tank of the tender and somebody shut the lid on him, and we could hear him banging, "Let me out, let me out, let me out." We got told off by Ben Apted for locking this boy into the water tank. Well, as my cleaning career progressed, those ahead of me had gone off to firing school, and I found myself actually as the senior cleaner. Not the cleaner of one of the cleaning gangs, but the senior cleaner of all of the gangs. After we got through Easter in 1962, we used to go to the motive power, the running forward and say, when can I go to firing school? When can I go to firing school? He said, not until you're 16 years of age. Factories Act won't allow you to work with mechanics until you are 16. And so, a brown manila windowed envelope with a slip of paper in it telling me that I had to report to the firing school at Guildford. I can't remember the date, but I think it was about late April, early May. I know it was before my birthday. And report to Inspector John Barrett. And 6 of us on the course, and it was quite funny because we were all in our best blue overalls, spotlessly clean, all dressed up, masquerading as real firemen and catching the train down to Guildford. And we used to travel to Guildford, pick the train up at Vauxhall. Well, Guildford, that was an eye-opener. Guildford Firing Training School. It was a classroom, proper classroom, with lovely drawings, lovely photographs on the wall, models of injectors and models of gauge glasses. And we had a very, very good structured training course on how a locomotive works and how we as firemen were to manage the boiler. And our role was to ensure that the driver had a constant supply of steam and the boiler was maintained with an adequate water level. The actual element of the rules and regulations that we were expected to carry out as firemen, this training was purely man-machine interface. How we as firemen were to manage the boiler. How we were to manage safety was seen as a secondary issue in those days. This element of rules and regulations training was focused around our personal safety, should we have to get down from the footplate to use the telephone, mindful of the conductor rail, mindful of stepping out onto a bridge parapet and falling down the bridge, and how to apply a detonator to the running rail and detonators. There was an element of practical understanding applied to the training, so it was a period spent in the classroom where you were given the theory and then you were taken out onto a locomotive in Guildford shed where your understanding was put to the test. And so as an individual that had, if you like, taken an interest into the locomotive, whilst I was a cleaner, it was second nature for me to correctly identify the mechanical parts of a steam locomotive and those elements that the firemen in particular would use. Boiler water gauges, dampers, fire hole door, firing techniques, baffle plate. Also the safety precautions that had to be adopted with steam locomotives, remembering that everything was hot to touch, remembering that hot steam and hot water everywhere on a locomotive, and the equivalent of leaving the locomotive out of gear and the handbrake on was applied to steam locomotives. And so all these safety precautions that were ingrained in us, we then had the final examination on our theory and understanding, and the examination also contained a practical element, and where we were taken on a very short trip with the firing instructor watching us to see the way that we handled ourselves. And when I was told that I'd successfully passed, I was elated. I was now a fireman. And so we were told to report to the list clerk's office for our next turn of duty. And what a shock that was.